Good morning. Like Charlotte said, my name is Dr. Rory Megginson. I am Director of Learning Development here at Core Power. Already today, you've been hearing from some of the technical challenges as well as the regulatory and insurability challenges we need to overcome before we can see the widespread deployment of commercial maritime. My role here today is to talk to you through kind of the third pillar of things we need to achieve before we get to that deployment. And that's making sure we have the crew in place, they're in the right numbers and with the right training to be able to use these technologies successfully. So before we look to the future, I want to take a brief moment to kind of take the temperature of where we are now. We're really going to be operating in a cross-section between two existing industries. So the first, we obviously have the maritime workforce. The maritime workforce is, by its very nature, one of the most global workforces that is in the world today. If you go have a look at stats for seafarer nationalities, and it is well worth a look to see the sheer volume of countries on there, you'll see the kind of international nature of it. However, those stats are dominated by a small number of countries. Places like the Philippines, Indonesia, and India provide a huge proportion of the sailors we see today. While it's an international industry and we should be able to pull people from anywhere, we're increasingly struggling to do so. Drewry's latest crewing report suggested that by 2030, we'll have a 10% shortage of deck officers available to the industry. This is a major concern. This isn't just down to the expansion of the global fleet we're seeing as international trade continues to increase, but also increasingly difficulties attracting people into the industry and then retaining them once we've got them in the door. This is why we're beginning to see an increased focus on things like the human factor in shipping, on crew welfare and seafarer happiness. If we improve those, hopefully we can, we get more people in and retain the people we have. So there's a slight shortage in maritime. If we look to nuclear, we're in a very interesting place. Hopefully you can all see this graph, which I think is kind of a really fascinating history of where nuclear has been for the last sort of 50 years. So let's start with the kind of bad bit. You'll be able to see these two massive bars on the right showing us the amount of people in the age brackets 50 to 60. These are people who are beginning to approach a retirement level. They will leave the industry, they will take their skills with them. They're the people who joined in the last kind of big rollout we saw of nuclear energy. And the problem is we don't necessarily have the same levels of staffing in the cohorts behind them to fill those gaps. So we're looking at something of a skills shortage. However, this is actually also going to be compounded by an increasing rollout of SMRs in countries with existing nuclear fleets. Think about the UK, US, France, Japan, all looking at this technology are going to need the workforce to drive this process forward as the rollout intensifies. And we've also got to think about countries that are beginning to look at, nuclear for the first time. There's a huge rollout of nuclear going on right now in the UAE, and that has had to pull in workforce from other countries who have experience. And there's countries, Indonesia beginning to look at nuclear. The Greek Prime Minister, obviously Greek, a big shipping country, but not necessarily a big nuclear one at the moment, beginning to look at nuclear as part of their energy mix. So there's a real kind of compounding factor there where we're looking at a shortage, but there's kind of demands higher than ever. But I do also want to, look at kind of the positive end of this graph. If you look at the lower, kind of our left-hand side with our lower age cohorts, we're seeing a massively increased interest in young people in careers in nuclear. They're beginning to look at the problems of climate change and decarbonisation and asking themselves, what can I do to play a role in solving those problems? Many science grads are looking at and thinking, well, nuclear is the most effective way I can deal with that, and they're joining the industry. And we're fortunate that we're now growing the number of projects we have available so we can get those people in and they can begin to develop their careers in this exciting industry. So up until now, I've obviously been talking about our two industries separately. They always obviously have one place that they do interact. I'm sure there are several graduates of the United States and United Kingdom's nuclear navies in the room today. These are incredibly well-respected institutions that have operated massive fleets of reactors for several decades with impeccable safety and security records. This figure here, so that's 14,000 years of reactor operations between the US, UK and Russia in terms of nuclear at sea, shows that we can build the correct training protocols and pipelines to deploy this technology successfully. So that's where we are now. So now we want to look out towards the future. So what we want to think about is not necessarily the first bit of deployment. We need to look all the way out to the middle of the century, into about 2060, and look at what our demand for crew looks like at that point. For the first half, we're obviously thinking about international shipping. I know this is a very shipping-focused audience. We're looking at a addressable market of around 7,400 ships that are appropriate for direct nuclear propulsion. It's important that we think that not every crew member on that ship needs to have the same level of nuclear training. There's a big difference between our crew in the engine room, or the nuclear engine room as it is now, where we'll have to have reactor operators who have the ability to operate and monitor the reactors to a high degree, versus our deck crew. Now, our deck crew may just need a slightly enhanced level of training. We need to think about things like radiological protection, radiological safety, and accident scenario planning. That's where they're going to need training, but we don't necessarily need everyone to be a reactor operator. The other half of our market is FMPPs. By 2060, we're looking at about 300 FMPPs deployed globally, according to our current modeling. And a structure like that, power barge, is looking at about 65 kind of nuclear qualified staff. This is probably more similar to how nuclear operators are today. These are obviously more static assets. So where does that kind of get us to? It means by 2060, we need 280,000 nuclear qualified crew members to some level. Nuclear operators, but also general nuclear trained crew. I know that seems like a massive number, and let's be fair here, it is. However, it's important to note there are currently 1.9 million seafarers out there today. We had the ability to train 1.9 million to work on conventional vessels, diesel vessels. We've developed training protocols for LNG vessels. This is not unachievable. We just need to think about what steps we need to take. And that's kind of what I want to go on next. The first and most kind of, in many ways, fundamental is making sure we're setting out the right culture. Tobi spoke to you earlier about the Liberty program and about how the program must contain the highest standards of safety and security to make sure it's a success. And it's important that that kind of aim is our North Star as we look to develop the crewing and training requirements and training processes for the next generation of seafarers. We've got to have a culture that has accountability at all levels for the safety and security of the vessels. The next step is kind of, let's say, the more boring one, which is, getting the regulations right. We've seen recently at the IMO, they've committed to an update of regulation A49112 of SOLAS. So that's the Code of Safety for Nuclear Ships. That will inform design decisions and vessel, how we operate these vessels. But in terms of crewing, we're going to have to start looking beyond that. It's likely that nuclear trained crews would have to have different, training compared to regular. That means we're going to have to look at how we update this STCW, as well as the International Ship and Port Facility Security Code, to make sure that they are aware of what a modern nuclear reactor is and how it operates and what we need to do to ensure that the crewing requirements are correct. And it's once we have those regulations, we can use those to update both national regulations as well as training requirements and certification procedures. And then we need to start training people. In a moment, you'll be able to hear from Jerry Paul about his work at Maine Maritime Academy, where they have put nuclear back on the maritime syllabus. And that's a wonderful start and a great place to begin, but we're going to have to expand that. We need to think about how we put nuclear back in the process for training, both in the US, United Kingdom, and across the globe. Part of that's going to be partnering with existing training operators. There are many fantastic universities, maritime academies, and other training providers out there who want to play a part in this industry. And there's also the kind of harder end of the spectrum. We need to think about how we build up specific training for nuclear operators. They're kind of the real engine, where they are literally in the engine room of what we're trying to do. And we're going to need to make sure we've got appropriate facilities, regard to, simulators, so they can have some hands-on training experience on these reactors. It's not just training, though. We mentioned earlier about getting people in the door of the maritime industry. We need to start looking for new talent in new places. At the top of this list, you kind of have what I would describe as the low-hanging fruit of nuclear sailors. Obviously, there's many nuclear Navy veterans, many of whom may want to expand their careers at sea outside of the military. We also have existing seafarers who we can upskill to meet the challenges of these new technologies. And then we need to start expanding. We need to think about nuclear engineering students. Often today, they're looking at kind of static facilities. At the end of the day, shipping is exciting. It's the adventure of it. And we have to make sure we're offering them those opportunities. We need to expand our work in maritime academies. But then we need to go further. We need to think about the existing nuclear workforce. Can they be brought offshore? And also the very fundamental entry points into our industry. What are we doing in terms of further education colleges and community colleges to make sure maritime nuclear is out there as a potential, career that people can pursue? And we also need to think about apprenticeships. The maritime industry has an incredibly proud history in apprenticeships, from the cadetships that many seafarers take part in, to also, work in shipyards where many marine engineers get their start as apprentices. So now I've told you what everyone else should do, I thought we should mention briefly what Core Power is doing. Core Power is very proud that over the last year we've set up something called the Core Power Academic Programme to support students and academics interested in the field of maritime nuclear. These often come to us as students who independently began to look into this field and want to carry out research projects as part of their studies. We're very, proud that this year we supported 26 students at the time I wrote these slides, and 29 this morning, students who have had an interest in maritime nuclear. That includes, we've had some excellent projects on nuclear-powered yachts, on safety, on, marine design, and all aspects of the topic. And we're really proud that we've been able to support those. Last couple of weeks ago, we had our first ever online conference where those students presented their work to the wider maritime community. And we've actually got 2 of the winners of that conference here today. And I encourage you to go out and speak to them and find out about their work. So, I've lost my wrap-up slide, but what we need to do in terms of building the workforce, we need to make sure we've set out the criteria we require and set out the culture we need to make this a success in terms of rollout. We need to make sure we've set out correct regulations so we know the standards we're working to. And then we need to work as an industry to build the training capacity to make sure we can get a pipeline of talented and enthusiastic young people into this industry, as we play an incredibly important role in the economy of the next century. I'm going to hand you over to Tobi now, who I think is going to introduce the rest of our panelists.
Well, good morning again, everyone. Welcome to our last panel of the morning on maritime nuclear workforce development. I'm going to take a cue from Phil and moderate from up here, if you don't mind. I'm very sorry you have to hear my voice again, but whilst I'm delighted to be moderating this panel, I'm going to do my best to make sure that it's the panel that do all the talking. But very briefly, as we heard from Rory there, as the shipping industry accelerates this transition and as the development of transportable nuclear power becomes more tangible, there is this recognition that people and not just the tech are going to be at the heart of this. So I'm joined by a very distinguished panel of experts here. They bring perspectives from training, from operations, from policy, and from innovation. Charlotte's already briefly introduced them, but I'm just going to give them a moment to embellish those introductions a little bit, and then we'll dive into the discussion. But if I could ask you to keep them fairly brief, that would be great. Evangelos, I'm going to start with you, if that's okay.
Yep.
So if you could perhaps just kick us off by telling us a bit more about you and your work and how it relates to the topic.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank Core Power for the kind invitation. I'm Evangelos Boulougouris. I'm head of the Department of Naval Architecture, also in the Marine Engineering at the University of Strathclyde. I'm a professor of safety of marine operations and a chair at the Maritime Safety Research Center, which was sponsored by Royal Caribbean and the DNV Class Society. I'm also a member of the Royal Institution of Naval Architects Safety Committee to IMO, and I participate in several committees like MSc, SDC, and so on. Our department utilizes research-led teaching, educating the next generation of naval architects, ocean and marine engineers, and upskilling and reskilling the existing engineering workforce, as we discussed. We participate very actively in many UK, European, and international research collaboration and projects on decarbonization, and this includes UK SOAR, Clean Maritime Demonstration, Horizon Europe, and so on. We have research collaborations with hundreds of universities and industry organizations globally, and our research is on commercial maritime nuclear. We find this an exciting area, and we would like to focus from now on. We conducted a number of feasibility studies in the years already at the master's group project level, supported also by Core Power and other companies. And we did an analysis. We, as a department in our undergraduate and postgraduate programs, we have many different areas, but we do not cover maritime nuclear. Looking around in the UK higher educational landscape and internationally, we found out that there are many such programs for commercial shipping, and therefore we identified that there is a gap. In Strathclyde, we discuss internally with the Advanced Nuclear Research Center and other departments the development of such a curriculum, and we need to see how it will be properly accredited, which is also another issue. However, we recognize that although we have an increased interest for NAOME from our international students, domestically, we need to step up our efforts in STEM. We are working with professional bodies like the Royal Institution of Naval Architects and IMAREST towards attracting more talent, but the maritime nuclear will need additional efforts to make it more attractive to our engineers. And yes, this is pretty much my...
Fantastic.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Evangelos. That's great. Jerry, I'm going to come to you next if I can. I know we're not in strict order there, but if I can come to you next, just to expand a little bit about your career in maritime nuclear.
Good nearly afternoon, everyone. I'm Gina Kim, different photo, but the same person. This is what ITF and IMO did to me the last 10 years. So ITF is International Transport Workers Federation. We are a federation of trade unions. We cover 16.5 million transport workers around the world, covering nearly 140 countries. And seafarers, Rory just mentioned that there are 1.9 million seafarers out there. ITF covers 1 million seafarers domestic as well. So our calculation says that it's about just above 2.2 million seafarers out there. The reason why I'm here is I need to thank personally the person sitting over there, Uni Emo from WNTI. We drafted IMO submission together. We waited 2 years, and finally last month it happened. So all the panels mentioned about the IMO finally made sensible decision. There was a wonderful person behind the scene, and we were honored to be part of that co-sponsorship. And in 2022, ITF Maritime Safety Committee that covers the IMO meetings drafted a table that consists of all the possible alternative fuels as well as technologies. Nuclear power was one of them before we drafted the IMO submission. So when Uni reached out to the ITF officially, that was like, faith, destiny. That's why we're here. Thank you.
Jerry, please. Yeah.
Thank you, Toby. My name's Jerry Paul, and as I think Toby or somebody had mentioned earlier, I did recently retire as president of the Maritime Academy, although I spent most of my career prior to that on 3 of Ian's 4 pillars: nuclear safety, nuclear security, and nuclear safeguards. But I am proud to be here and be invited to share some thoughts from 40 years of perspective, matriculating through different aspects of the industry. I want to also applaud Core Power for recognizing workforce as an essential component for the nuclear mariners of the future, and how important that is, and how important it is for us to be thinking about that at this stage with equal parity to the time, energy, and resources that we dedicate to the technology considerations and reactor designs and regulations. Workforce will ultimately define our success. I think Toby mentioned it earlier when he described what Admiral Rickover had created, and I think the term there, the phrase that Toby used was a deeply ingrained culture of excellence, the gold standard of quality. And throughout my career, I've seen that as being as great a distinguishing factor within the nuclear fields as is the unique aspects of the technical components. But I'm glad to share some thoughts, not just from a Maritime Academy perspective, but going back almost, 35 years, starting out as a young mariner student at a Maritime Academy. I selected the only one that had a nuclear program at the time, and the only one that now, again, has one and is developing one. Of course, at that time, I ended up not working on nuclear maritime ships once I realized that there weren't any, but instead on shoreside nuclear power as a reactor engineer, and I saw workforce issues there in the commercial nuclear power sector, and the training and the educational rubrics that defined excellence and quality there, and then later in the practice of law, and then later running NNSA, the National Nuclear Security Administration in the U.S., which includes 3 components: the defense nuclear facilities, including the national security national laboratories that have nuclear materials, the Naval Reactors Program, and nuclear nonproliferation. And so seeing through all of those different roles, if you will, a common thread, the most significant thread defining success is the caliber and quality of the people. The nuclear family is unique, it is special, and that is, in my view, the greatest aspect of Admiral Rickover's legacy is creating that culture. And so I'm going to challenge people to not think of workforce as just recruiting, where do we find these mariners, and not just as training and not just as education, but the overall culture, the theme, the dynamic of world-class excellence, and not be afraid to frame it that way. These young people, I think Mikhail said it earlier in response to a question about our generations in this room, that we had been taught to fear, and we've been taught well. I'm going to challenge you to think about who the we is. The we is not in this room for the future nuclear mariner. And these young men and women, they have not been taught that in the same way, and they didn't live through some of the unfair characterizations. And one of the things that I noticed when I came back to the Academy many years later as its president was how many students came up to me, I guess they had seen my background or something, and said, Mr. Paul, can we do nuclear? Can we go back to nuclear? Can we do, is there going to be nuclear maritime ships? These are 18-year-old kids when we restarted and expanded that program, it became the single fastest growing and does to this day. We have to turn students away from it right now. It is so exciting to them. And so they do not have those same stigmas that we fear they might have just because we do. We need to play on that and as Rickover did, recognize the importance of investing in building that culture of quality, excellence, and quite frankly, prestige as we build out training and education for the nuclear mariner of the future.
Thanks, Jerry. That's a great intro. Nathan, if I could come to you.
Yeah, thank you. So my name's Nathan Read. I'm an academic at Cambridge University. I actually started out life as an actuary, did that for 5 years. So being in a room with insurance people and nuclear engineers, I recognize gives me a very warm, fuzzy feeling of wholeness. So thank you. So my research interests are in nuclear safety, how we do regulation, and in particular how this sort of nuclear dread that's been alluded to, how that filters down into regulation and practice. Also have interests in advanced reactors, including for novel applications like space and marine. My main reason for being on this panel is because I'm an educator, so I teach those subjects, nuclear safety and advanced reactors. And I'm also the course director for Cambridge's one-year program in nuclear energy, which is a postgraduate program. It's been very interesting to see the evolution of what brings students to us. So in the past, when we were founded in 2010 to help address this skills gap, you know, these horrible graphs that we've seen. 2010 is not a great year to start a nuclear program for that nuclear renaissance, because it obviously ended quickly. But for a long time, what we saw was people would be exposed to something that looked like a panacea, this or that advanced reactor. You know, thorium is a panacea, but it was kept from us due to a naval labs conspiracy, or that fusion is a source of unlimited energy. And our role is to sort of educate them in nuclear and keep the fire stoked whilst bringing them down to earth, only with a soft bump rather than a thud. What's interesting about marine nuclear is that we don't have to do that. It's something where there is no real alternative to doing this. And I think it's noticeable in the number of our students that have ended up at Core Power that it is a real source of excitement for them. And I think we shouldn't underestimate the value of good vibes and hype in teasing people in and keeping them in.
Brilliant. Thanks, Nathan. That's a great perspective, I think. And last but not least, Torbjørn.
Yes, so thank you, Tobi, for inviting us here. It's a great pleasure to be here and see so many people interested in nuclear. Yeah, my name is Torbjørn Lie. I'm working as a business development manager in OSM Tome. OSM Tome is ship manager, and we are managing around one way or another around 1,000 vessels for other owners. We have technical management of around 450 vessels, so we have our hands full, and hence, I mean, we have in here 29,000 seafarers, which is, of course, important to get educated whenever this is ready. My background is marine engineering. I've been in the maritime industry for more than 45 years now. And over the past 20 years, I've been working on fuels, fuel qualities, energy efficiency of vessels, and looking into new technologies. Over these years, I've been in institutions like DNV. I've been working with Wärtsilä as a technology provider. And I've been in the oil industry in a couple of oil companies. So hence, when we started on our small, shall we say, voyage on nuclear through the cooperation with the green shipping program in Norway, I was kind of halfway a skeptic, you know, but probably colored by my background. But nevertheless, in the green shipping program, we have been looking at all kind of emerging fuels, We are looking into new technologies, of course. So I thought that it's important to turn the last stone for now here, which is nuclear. So we applied to GSP to run a project on nuclear, advanced nuclear. And that was accepted. So we started that 2 years ago, and we finalized that work now in May this year. So, which ended up in a 100+ pages report on different topics, looking into public opinion, technology, environment, health, also then insurance, regulations and all that, and finance. So yeah, that is why I'm here.
Okay, thank you very much. That's excellent. Thanks to all of you for those introductions. Just to run through this middle section of the panel, I'm going to take some of the themes that Rory outlined for us in his keynote, but actually look at them in a slightly different order if possible. So first of all, I want to sort of acknowledge and examine in a bit more detail some of the challenges in this area. Jerry's talked a little bit about that culture. We can go into that in a touch more detail, and then consider the supply side of the equation and where some of this workforce can be derived from. But an important part as well is the roles of institutions and regulators. And then if we can pull all that together, if we have time, to get the panel's perspective on some potential solutions and strategies that we can put in place in the future. So like before, I want to try and keep some time aside for audience Q&A as well. So if you think of questions for the panel as we're going along, please hang on to them for a minute or two more, and we'll try and get to those in a short while. But actually, Tobi, I'm going to come back to you first, if I may, because in your role as a ship manager, it often requires you to handle many different things. But I get the sense that you have quite a unique perspective on the workforce element as part of that. And one phrase that's sort of borrowed a bit from shipbuilding, I suppose, it's sort of stuck with me a bit since this time last year when we did our event, was that the maritime nuclear workforce is really the ultimate long lead item. To what extent do you agree with that? And in your opinion, what's the greatest challenge to ensuring this future workforce supply?
Well, I think Rory summarized this very well in his presentation. But I mean, for us, ensuring a sufficient workforce for maritime nuclear mariners, it presents a unique and multifaceted set of challenges. And you mentioned most of them. I mean, specialist training and education, attracting new talent, public perception and policy. I mean, this could affect their recruitment or lack of such. Of course, for us, with all these seafarers, retention and career longevity it's important. Then the regulatory and security requirements and international standards and mobility, and we have talked a lot about this here. But ultimately then addressing the challenges here to ensuring a sufficient workforce of maritime nuclear mariners will require coordinated efforts between governments, industry and educational institutions. This also includes investing in robust training pipelines, promoting the value and safety of nuclear maritime careers, and ensuring clear pathways for advancement and international collaboration.
Okay, thanks very much, Torbjörn. That's great. Gina, maybe I could bring you in here for your perspective on this as well, if possible, because I'd love to know from your point of view as a representative of the mariners themselves, how attractive do you assess a career in floating nuclear actually really is? I mean, we hear constantly that each sector individually has challenges attracting and retaining its staff, and I get this is a bit of a devil's advocate question, but why is it better if we put those two industries together, or is it better?
So I'm seeing the clock. Should I give you short and sweet answer?
That would be great.
Yeah, very attractive.
I mean, I think I should check with Charlotte. We have until past, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. But yeah, we are a little bit behind, so brevity is good.
Already.
Yeah.
So
don't worry about the clock though, but yeah.
Thank you. Very attractive. It is very short answer. As Jerry just mentioned that nuclear people are special and unique. I do agree with you. It's not for the only young people, but people do understand this technology development and then the, opportunities, employment opportunities out there, they will go after that. So it's very attractive. As a trade union's perspective, money is important because money is there, so it's very attractive. I mean, I would go and apply for jobs if they give me a lot of money. And that's what we are, expecting. This maritime nuclear industry is going to open the door for the talent. And again, another thing about from the trade union perspective, collective bargaining agreement, it is fluid thing. So it's not like, it's not set in stone. I need this much holiday, and then you will get the holidays. So it is like, it gives a lot of room for drafting the first initial or different 21st century version of a nuclear collective bargaining agreement. And the difficulties for retaining talent, the previous speakers also mentioned as well, it's because of money as well. Because people got greed, and I'm greedy, I'm not greedy, yeah? And then when people got greedy, I do not want to put on a limelight on ship owners because I see a lot of them here. But when people got greedy, slowly, safety perspective and the safety got less priority. And then it becomes, kind of big loopholes for fraudulent or less, less stringent practices. So that's the difficulties in retaining talent. But the last part about the hybrid industry, why is it better? I'm going to take you back to my first point, because this is pilot. It opens the door for creating good practice, like oil industry. Anyone I talk to in IMO, if you are from oil industry representative, I've never heard so far. I've been in the IMO around 10 years. I've never heard any disappointing answers from those representatives. And I'm not going to mention any other cargo owners, any other owners, but that's why people still want to work in oil tankers. Thank you.
Thanks, Gina. I think that's a really candid series of answers there, and I think we really appreciate that. Nathan, I'd like to bring you back in here for on this point. I mean, you're well versed in reactor safety assessments and obviously advanced fission as well. So here's perhaps a slightly more specific challenge I want to get your take on. Maritime nuclear, as we've heard, is likely going to involve fourth gen reactor technology that hasn't been widely adopted yet in the terrestrial space, yet let alone at sea. So how do we kind of make sure that this higher level of understanding of novel systems is actually there in sufficient depth before we start, thinking about training programs that can realistically begin?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that we're embarking on two simultaneous adventures, nuclear on a boat and advanced reactors. And I think the lesson from the history of deploying advanced reactor technology is that the early commercial deployment part is the end of phase one of a new technology, not the beginning of phase two. There is stuff about the technology that you will not discover until you've operated it for a decade, let's say. We've seen this over and over again. And so the question is, what does that mean for the kinds of people who should be operating it? I think if you look at it through the very old lens of Rasmussen talking about what operators do, things they do are based on skills, rules, or knowledge in increasing order of sort of cognitive complexity. I'm the opposite of a nuclear alarmist, but I'll use an example that everyone knows. So at 3 Mile Island, there was a deficit of knowledge leading to a knowledge-based error. The operators just didn't know that it was possible you could have bubbles in the core that displace water in the pressurizer, making them think there was too much water in there, so they started draining it out, the opposite of what you wanted. But there could have been people with a much higher level of knowledge of these systems, this was very predictable behavior, who might have understood what was going on. And if you look at the commercial pilot plants for things like Hermes from Kairos, there will be people in there with the most intimate knowledge of these systems, the equivalent of a nuclear power plant head of physics or a reactor designer, who can be there in that early phase when unexpected stuff will happen. So the question is, what does that look like on the boat? Can we do this remotely, or do we need to have the equivalent of a head of physics on every boat waiting to see what emerges with these new systems? So I think that will be a challenge but it shouldn't be forever. I mean, once we get to the stage we are now with light water reactors, 20,000 reactor years of operation, 95% capacity factor, this problem will go away. But we shouldn't forget that in 1975, which is already a couple of decades in, the US fleet capacity factor average was 55%. And it's taken a long time of perfecting this technology and the way it's operated to get up to what we expect now.
Great, thanks, Nathan. Jerry, I'm going to come back to you, but if possible. And you talked a little bit in your introduction already about this mindset, and I think it's fascinating. But a little follow-up, if I could, on that is, and it's something you've said to me in the past, is that naval reactors are not just going to turn their ring binders over to the commercial sector. That's not how it's going to work. But what do you think? And briefly, if possible, how can we emulate some techniques from naval reactors about how to still instill that mindset?
It's great. It's a great question. It goes back to, again, that word culture. And I think Rory had some great statistics on the number of crew mariner needs in the future. And I'm going to suggest that it's actually far greater than that. I'm also going to suggest that what a nuclear mariner is fully integrated. It's every single person involved in that supply chain. They are all part of the family. That's what we do in naval reactors. That's what we do in commercial nuclear power. It goes from the wiper in the engine room up to the bridge and the steward's shop. On the shore side, it's the C-suite and the board. Everybody needs to be part of that culture. And so building that culture into your whole way of thinking is part of the prestige. It's also part of the quality that we talked about. And don't be afraid to establish it as a much higher standard. Don't assume that the stigma of that will drive people away. It has the opposite effect. People want to come to something that is the best, that is perceived as the best. And yes, Gina's right. They are motivated by greater compensation. We see that in the commercial nuclear side. There is a perception that things nuclear are going to be a little more profitable. And that is a driver for these young kids. I mean, my students coming out of Maine Maritime, they'll work 6 months out of the year, and with a starting salary, I mean, they can make $140,000, $150,000 a year working half the year. No other colleges, non-maritime colleges, can compete with that, and they know that, and that drives students to that. So compensation does matter, but that aspect of prestige matters. But the aspect of world-class, excellent quality needs to be built in vertically throughout your entire organization. And if somebody asked me, well, what can you do now? I would say recognize workforce as a major factor in all of this for your organization going forward. By the way, it will be very competitive. And so those who are thinking about this now are going to be the ones who are better positioned to get that segment of the workforce. It will also have a regulatory component. If you look at regulatory schemes for licensing and permitting nuclear facilities, they all have a requirement for demonstrating a very specific and very deep and broad training and educational program. You're going to have that in place. I would recommend perhaps a consortium approach, private sector stakeholders getting together and developing those. I would recommend challenging your vendors to play their appropriate role in training and education. Don't just rely on academia. If you look at the commercial nuclear power industry, the major vendors, in the U.S. anyway, Westinghouse and GE and even subcontract sub-vendors have their own training programs that are integrated with the licensees' training programs. All of that is something that cannot just be put in place at the end. This is not just an endorsement. This is not just, hey, now you take somebody who's spent their career working on diesel engines and say, okay, now we're going to teach you the nuclear side. Doesn't work that way. This is a major undertaking. Those who recognize that now, those in this room led by Core Power, who are thinking about that now and invest in the resources to put in place those systems, they're the ones who are going to be competitive and be successful ahead of all of the others. And the last thing, and I know we're short on time, is to just say that although the bad news is that we're in a period of the greatest mariner shortage in the maritime industry's history. It's very difficult to get enough mariners. The good news is that as to the training and the education that I'm talking about, there are some decent models out there. They're not perfect. I co-authored with 2 other professors while I was still at MMA a paper presented to the International Association of Maritime Universities on a demonstration training and education curriculum. It's out there. Be glad to share that. It was very popular among IAMU. The other maritime academies around the world, there's 81 of them, are, I think, moving in that direction, especially the Korean Mokpo University and some others. You can look to 10 CFR 55 for the NRC, the U.S. regulations that require the training programs. That'll give you a sense of its magnitude and scope. There's the National Academy of Nuclear Training that was established by INPO, Institute of Nuclear Power Operators, through IAEA. There are a lot of resources out there to give you some sense for the level of training and education that's going to be necessary to maintain that quality nuclear mariner workforce of the future.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jerry. I'm glad you mentioned that International Association of Maritime Universities report, because it is quite a fundamental bit of work, and I'm glad you brought that up. I've actually got a lot more questions for the panel, but I'm keeping an eye on the time, and I would really like to open this up to the audience for a short section. So we'll keep those in abeyance, my questions, and if anyone has any questions from the floor for our panelists, please put your hand up. It's hard to see.
Yes, thank you. José Esteve from Bureau Veritas. I comment on a question to what Gina has said, which I think is very true. Having worked in the oil and gas industry, and particularly in Australia, where I have seen master's degree engineers quitting their job in Perth to go out and drive lorries in the outback because they were winning like 100% more than what we were giving as engineers, shows that there is that effect of greed that impacts. And I have also seen people changing companies within 2 months of getting a new job, and then changing again companies because they were getting 5%, 10% increased salary. That has nevertheless had as an impact the loss of competence, the loss of skills, because they never get to grow and learn within the companies. But I have also seen crew members staying within a shipping company because of the culture, because of the feeling of belonging somewhere, and not changing companies because they are within a family. So my question to you would be, how can we achieve that sense of culture, that sense of belonging somewhere and achieving something together that can allow the crew members, the seafarers, to stay longer in the shipping sector?
Thanks, Jose. I'm not sure who's best. Does that possibly, Rory, you want to start off?
I think Jerry said something really interesting about having an aspirational culture and it being somewhere people feel proud to work of. And I think that's something we can look at as we see nuclear as a new technology. If you look at the careers that attract people, it tends to be things at the cutting edge. And I think that's something we've got to make sure we put at the forefront of our efforts to recruit, but also make sure we're continuing reinforcing that as these people move into operations, so that they can feel that they are continuously part of something that's making a big difference in terms of decarbonisation, which is often something many people are very passionate about, and feel that they are playing a role and that is valued within the business. I think that's probably how you can build that culture.
Tobi, do you something about that?
Yeah, I think from what we see operating all types of vessels, we see that our seafarers or officers are often seeking the most challenging ones. And of course, on board, should we say, gas tankers or gas carriers, you have a certain extra training needed. And Gina, you get some extra money as well, working on board these ships. So I think that will go for the same when it comes to nuclear, I'm sure. Okay.
If I could briefly, Gina again makes a great point that an effective incentive is compensation. But what mariners are looking for, this generation of mariners today, in addition to that, is quality of life. So when I was a young kid with a white sea bag on my shoulder, I was fine with going off for 6 months. These young folks don't want that. they want 1 on, 1 off, not 6 on, 6 off. FNPP is potentially very well positioned to scratch that itch, if you will, in a competitive way. Sending a message to these young mariners that with FNPPs that are deployed mostly coastal, they can be on, off, and even when they're on, they're still, these aren't blue water ships. They have access to families, access to the coast, access to urban resources. And so tailoring your message and your brand, yes, to greater compensation and yes, to prestige, but also to a higher quality of life, shipboard quality of life. Those are 3 things that can give this a competitive edge in the challenges of building a workforce and maintaining it, retention.
Thanks. We'll just take one more question from the audience, I think. Gosh, there's so many. We're going to have to spill this over into lunch. One hand I saw, Rob, was Erland, just there.
Yeah, it's Erland Hagen again. One of the key parameters about the crew situation will be, of course, how big will the crew be on each nuclear ship. As Nathaniel pointed out, on the first few ships with prototype reactors applications, we would probably see experts on these reactors on board. But it cannot be like that for every ship in the future. In earlier discussions, it has been mentioned that the crew operating the reactor will be counted in the dozens. This is not a very optimistic view for the future. The crew on ships is usually not on that size. How can we expect that we can bring the requirements of crew down to what we see today on ships?
Okay. Torbjörn?
Yeah, I can comment a little bit on that because we have looked into this together with the Norwegian University of Science and Technology, which contributed greatly to our report. Of course, there will be different amount of people needed for different technologies. I think from maybe the gas-cooled reactors in one end to the lead-cooled reactors in the other end, if you were talking generation 4 reactors. So there will be a different need of amount of people. And of course, the STCW and the training will be at the bottom, but then you will need, as you said, a common nuclear training, and then you will also need different training for the different technologies. But that will also be a different amount of people for the different technologies.
Okay, that's great. Gina, go on very briefly.
Yeah, sorry.
Very briefly.
Yeah, the question is about manning. So without trade union, it should keep coming from trade union perspective. So yes, we see as a first phase, there will be more people required, but we already have international regulatory framework, SCCW, as Tobi mentioned, and also SPS code, and IP code, Polar code, cruise ships, they have all different roles. Company knows what kind of roles they need. So they will hire more people or they will hire less people. It doesn't really matter as long as they can utilize this framework. And just to briefly mention about the previous question, belongingness, I'd like to recommend for the regulatory and government bodies, please use MLC. MLC already had social contract framework. And the second one for the companies, try to include package for family caring. So if your family is cared, and you can send your daughter, your mom, your husband to see. So that's one of the recommendations.
Okay. I think we're going to have to draw a line there, unfortunately, in the interest of time. But I think I speak for all the panel when I say we've had many more questions than we've had time for. If you'd like to seek them out at lunchtime, I'm sure we'll be able to pick up on these discussions. I'm just briefly going to hand back to Rory because he has a very quick couple of announcements to make before we break for lunch. Thank you.